He was 32, exhausted, and invisible to the company he saved every single day. 3 floors above him, a billionaire was about to notice.
She had never lost a negotiation in her life for the man about to walk off the elevator and say no.
Send him in now.
She offered him a golden ticket. He turned it down flat, for a reason no executive in that building would ever understand. A school boiler exploded. A father had nowhere else to turn, and a 6-year-old was about to meet the most powerful woman in the building.
Power always gets what it wants. That was the only law Cloretta Quail had ever needed to learn, the rule that turned her father's regional shipping company into a billion-dollar global empire. She had outnegotiated hostile governments and crushed hostile takeovers, and never once in 10 years heard the word no and let it stand. So when a bone-tired logistics analyst with a coffee stain on his collar looked her dead in the eye and refused her, not once but twice, it cracked something open in a woman who had spent her entire adult life convinced nothing could touch her. If a story about power meeting its match sounds like your kind of watch, stay with me. Because what this man does in a boardroom 3 weeks later will change how you think about what money can actually buy. And if this story pulls you in, hit that like button and subscribe now, because there is a lot more where this came from. Fluorescent lights always hummed at a frequency that made Deion Morgan's molars ache, the kind of buzz you only notice on 3 hours of sleep and half a pot of scorched break room coffee. He stared at his monitor, watching rows of numbers blur into a gray smear. He was 32, but his bones felt decades older. Single parenthood ages a man in dog years, and 6-year-old Lillian had spent the previous night coughing up a lung, which meant Deion had spent the hours between midnight and dawn rubbing her back and running the nebulizer. Now it was Tuesday morning at Quail International, and he was trying to figure out why $12 million in automotive freight had vanished between Rotterdam and Chicago. He ran the macro one more time, and there it was. A routing error compounded by a faulty customs algorithm quietly bleeding the company for days. He typed a terse 3-line fix, attached the corrected manifest, and sent it to his department head. He did not care about credit. He just wanted the supply chain moving so he could clock out at exactly 5:01. 3 floors up, Cloretta Quail sat in a corner office that felt more like a modern art museum than a workspace, floor-to-ceiling glass framing the Chicago skyline. She did not do clutter or inefficiency. At 34, she had taken her father's shipping company and weaponized it into a logistics titan, and she was rereading Deion's email with a deepening frown. The Rotterdam bottleneck had paralyzed her European division for 3 straight days. Her senior analysts had blamed strikes. Her vice presidents had blamed weather, yet a mid-level analyst in the basement had solved it in 40 minutes without being asked. She pulled his file. 5 years at the company, solid reviews, 0 ambition, never once applied for a promotion. "Get him up here," she told her assistant, and something in her voice made the assistant move fast. 10 minutes later, Deion stepped off the executive elevator and felt entirely out of place, a faint stain of strawberry yogurt still on his cuff. The floor was unnervingly silent, thick carpet swallowing every footstep. Cloretta watched him enter and, for the first time in longer than she could remember, watched a man walk into her office who did not sweat. Vice President stammered. Deion just looked tired, hands in his pockets, waiting. "You solved the Rotterdam issue," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "The algorithm was reading the wrong port codes," he said, his voice flat. "It was logging cargo in Bremerhaven instead of Rotterdam. So the system froze the shipment. Simple if you know where to look." She studied him, the exhaustion sitting in his posture like a second skeleton. She had spent her life surrounded by polished plastic. He felt like rough-hewn wood. "I'm hosting a private dinner Friday at my estate in Lake Forest," she said, rounding her desk. "Investors, political connections. Bring your route data. We'll discuss a new role for you." It was an order wearing the costume of an invitation. He did not blink. "I appreciate the offer, Ms. Quail, but I can't." The silence suddenly weighed 100 pounds. "Excuse me? I have a previous obligation," he repeated. "Cancel it," she said, an edge entering her voice. "This is your career." "I can't cancel," he said, glancing at the clock. "It's my daughter's school play. She's playing a tree. I promised I'd be in the front row." Cloretta stared at him, genuinely unable to do the math. "You're turning down a dinner that could double your salary for a school play?" "I am," he said. "I'll pay for the best nanny in the city," she offered. "They can record it." He gave her a tight, humorless smile. "You can't outsource being a father, Miss Quail. A recording doesn't clap when she looks out into the audience. Have a good evening." He walked out, and for the first time in a decade, Cloretta Quail had been told no, not by a competitor, but by a tired man in a cheap suit who valued a child in a cardboard tree costume more than her entire empire. It infuriated her, and terrifyingly, it captivated her more than anything had in years. 3 weeks passed, and Cloretta could not let it go. The Rotterdam fix ended up saving the company just north of $4 million, and Deion remained exactly where he'd always been, leaving at 5:01 on the dot every day. She caught herself pulling his personnel file, and that was how she learned he was a widower, that his wife had died of an aggressive lymphoma when Lillian was 2, and that since then he had become something like a ghost in the corporate machine, doing exactly enough to keep his benefits and mortgage current. Late one night in her penthouse, bourbon warming untouched in her hand, she admitted something she rarely allowed. She had wealth, power, respect, fear, and her apartment was silent as a tomb. Her last relationship had ended when her fiancé accepted he would always be the mistress to her company. Deion Morgan's total immunity to her wealth gnawed at something underneath all of it. He had peace, and he protected it like a wall of fire. So when the director of global operations position opened after the previous director's heart attack, Cloretta saw her opening. She bypassed human resources, had the contract drawn up and stamped with her personal seal, and summoned Deion to her office on a rainy Wednesday. He arrived looking even more depleted and sat while she slid a thick leather folder across the glass. He skipped past the legal language to the compensation page. $450,000 base, stock options, a signing bonus that could pay off his house by morning. He did not gasp. He closed the folder. "What's the catch, Miss Quail?" "Oversight of our European and Asian hubs," she said smoothly. 14 to 18 travel days a month, often alongside me. For one fraction of a second, she watched the temptation cross his face. Then it vanished, and he pushed the folder back until it stopped exactly halfway between them. No, her breath actually caught. "Did you read the numbers?" "I read them," he said softly. "They're very generous." "Then what is the problem?" "It's not the money." He cut in calm, but with steel underneath. 18 days a month means I miss half her life. The scraped knees, the homework meltdowns, bedtime stories. You'd be setting her up for life, Cloretta argued. Best schools. A live-in nanny. She already lost her mother, he said, his voice dropping an octave. She is not going to lose her father to an airport lounge, too. Cloretta stood, both hands flat on the desk. You're throwing away a generational opportunity to play house. Love doesn't pay Ivy League tuition. Deion rose slowly, looking far bigger than a tired basement analyst. You're right, he said. Love doesn't pay tuition, but money doesn't hold your hand when you're scared in the dark. You're asking me to sell you the only hours of my life that actually matter, and I won't do it. Find someone else. He walked to the door. Deion, she called out. He paused, hand on the glass, but didn't turn around. I'll have the quarterly report on your desk by 5. When the door clicked shut, $500,000 sat rejected on her desk, and Cloretta felt a bizarre mixture of fury and hollow envy, because she had spent her life climbing to the top of a mountain only to discover the man at the bottom didn't even want the view. A month later, the tension at Quail International was thick enough to choke on. A massive multi-nation port strike had locked down freight from Antwerp to Valencia, and the company was bleeding hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour. Cloretta was essentially living in the boardroom, down in logistics. Deion's petty manager used the crisis as cover to bury him in impossible workloads. Deion took it silently, digging through secondary routing options through North Africa, until Tuesday brought a crisis of its own. Lillian's school called at 11. A boiler had exploded, flooding the lower level. Emergency closure 1 hour to pick up every child. His neighbor was out of town. The after-school center was closed. He had no choice. By noon, he was walking through the lobby of Quail International, holding the hand of a 6-year-old girl in a bright yellow raincoat and light-up dinosaur sneakers, a turtle-shaped backpack on her shoulders, standing out against the sea of gray suits like a flare in the dark. "Stay close, Bug," he murmured. "Is this where you make the boxes move, Daddy?" she asked, eyes wide at the screens tracking global shipping routes. "Something like that," he told her, settling her into a small fortress built from filing boxes under his desk. "You're a secret agent now." "Secret agents are very quiet." Lillian nodded solemnly. "Agent Turtle reporting for duty." He handed her a juice box and threw himself back into the data. 2 hours later, Cloretta descended from the glass tower, flanked by 2 nervous vice presidents, heading straight for the analyst bullpen because she already knew Deion was the only one who could untangle the mess. She rounded the corner and stopped dead. A little girl sat cross-legged under a desk, coloring a dragon, sneakers flashing sporadically. Deion slammed down his phone and stepped between Cloretta and his daughter, jaw tight. The school had an emergency closure, he said, daring her to challenge him. "She is not interfering with my work." Cloretta looked past him. "Hi," Lillian said, peeking out. "I'm Agent Turtle." "Are you the boss lady?" "My daddy says you work too much and it makes you grumpy," she added. One of the vice presidents gasped. Deion closed his eyes, already calculating how fast he could clear out his desk. But Cloretta didn't yell. A strange, Unfamiliar expression crossed her face instead. "Your daddy," she said softly. Meeting Dion's terrified, defiant eyes is highly observant. "Is that a dragon?" "Yes," Lillian said. "He's burning down a castle because the king was mean." "Practical," Cloretta murmured. "Straightening." "Armor sliding back into place," she said. "Bring your European data to the boardroom in 10 minutes. Just the data." "And my daughter?" Dion asked flatly. "Agent Turtle is welcome to secure the perimeter," Cloretta said. "The carpets are softer there anyway." As she walked away, her heart hammered against her ribs because she finally understood something. She hadn't been trying to buy Deion Morgan's time or his brilliance. She had been trying to buy the one thing money had never purchased for her, a reason to go home. 10 minutes later, the boardroom felt pressurized, frosted glass and mahogany built to make anyone at the table feel small. 7 board members sat wearing identical expressions of poorly concealed panic. The door swung open, and Deion walked in carrying a battered messenger bag, a half-empty juice box, and Lillian's small fingers, her turtle backpack dragging behind her. Richard Trent, the chief financial officer, flushed plum. "Cloretta, we are bleeding capital by the second and you bring a child into a strategy session? Sit down, Richard, or leave." Cloretta said without looking at him. He sank back, sputtering. "The floor is yours," she told Deion. He settled Lillian by a potted ficus, whispered Agent Turtle, "Secure the tree," and spun his laptop toward the table. "You're treating the European strikes like a localized labor dispute," he said, his voice steady. "It isn't. It's a systemic gridlock. Antwerp is shut down. Valencia is running at 10% capacity." He pulled up a map spiderwebbed in red and green. "Reroute everything through Tangier. The Moroccan rail lines finished expansion 2 months ago, and their customs system integrates seamlessly with ours. We offload in North Africa, bypass the European Union entirely, and move goods up through Iberia by freight rail. It costs 8% more in transit fees, but the bleeding stops immediately." Silence stretched across the table at a solution nobody else had thought of. Richard refused to look at the screen. "That's absurd. We have no oversight in Tangier, the geopolitical risk. It's a phantom." Deion cut in. "You're quoting an assessment from 3 years ago. The Port Authority signed a stabilization pact in January. We move the freight or we write off $12 million a day. There is no third option." Richard slammed his palm on the table. "I will not be lectured by a basement data jockey who runs a daycare in a crisis center." Deion closed his laptop and stepped back. He'd given them the lifeline. If they wanted to drown out of pride, he wasn't going to stop them. "Richard," Cloretta said, barely above a whisper, and it landed like a gunshot. "Deion Morgan saved this company $4 million last month while you were golfing in Scottsdale," she said. "He just handed you the solution to a crisis your department failed to predict while raising a child alone. Speak down to him again, and I will dissolve your shares and make sure your name means nothing in this city." "Understood?" Richard nodded, pale. "Execute the Tangier reroute immediately." Meeting adjourned. "Get out." Within 30 seconds, the boardroom emptied, leaving only Cloretta, Deion, and Lillian. Meticulously coloring her dragon bright blue, Deion let out a slow breath. "I suppose I should clear out my desk." "You aren't fired," Cloretta said, walking to the window, the adrenaline draining out of her. "Then what was that?" "I offered you Director of Global Operations," she said. "You turned it down because the travel would cost you your daughter." You were right. He hadn't expected concession. Corporate America was built by men who had wives waiting at home. I perpetuated that because I never had a life outside this building. I don't want a machine in that chair. I need someone who understands how the world actually works. I need you. Here is my proposal. You take the role, but the terms are yours. 0 mandatory travel. You leave every day at 5. If there's an emergency, I fund a proxy for the overseas handshaking. I only care about results. You're rewriting the bylaws for 1 promotion, he said slowly. I am the CEO, she said simply. I own the bylaws. Deion looked down at Lillian, humming over her coloring book, and thought about the fact that this woman, who had every reason to crush him, was instead tearing down her own walls to meet him in the middle. All right, he said softly. I accept. 6 weeks later, the Tangier route had fully stabilized, and Quail International had barely felt the strike's impact. Deion's life transformed almost overnight. The financial anxiety that had sat on his chest for 4 years finally evaporated. He bought a reliable car, set up a college fund for Lillian, and kept his promise. Every day at 5, he logged off and went home to be a father. Cloretta watched with quiet fascination, noticing the department ran smoother once his analysts saw their director prioritize his family without apology. But she found herself facing a new problem. Without a crisis consuming every waking hour, her penthouse felt overwhelmingly silent, and watching Deion blend brilliance with humanity, she realized how underdeveloped her own life had become. On a crisp Saturday in late October, Deion sat on a bench in a Logan Square park, watching Lillian conquer a rope climbing structure. He didn't notice Cloretta until she sat down at the other end of the bench, out of her element in a thick wool sweater holding 2 paper cups. "I brought a bribe," she said. "I wasn't sure what you drank when you weren't forcing down break room sludge." "Dark roast black, thank you," he said, genuinely impressed. "What are you doing in Logan Square on a Saturday?" "I don't know, honestly," she admitted. "I realized I don't have anywhere to go on a weekend when the markets are closed." It was a staggering admission, and Deion didn't mock her. "It takes practice," he said. "What does?" "Being a person. When my wife died, I became a machine designed to keep Lillian alive. Not until she got old enough to notice I wasn't present did I force myself to care about things again." "You've spent your whole life building an empire," he told her. "It's going to take more than a few weeks to learn how to live outside of it." "I am terrifyingly bad at this," she murmured. "I know how to fire a hostile board member. I don't know how to sit on a park bench." "You're doing fine," he said, warmth in his voice. "You haven't fired anyone in at least 20 minutes. She laughed, rich and unguarded. "Look," Lillian shouted from the top of the rope pyramid. "Daddy, I'm the king of the castle." "I see you, Bug," he called back. "Don't fall off the throne." Cloretta watched the exchange and felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. For years, she had viewed families as a liability. Watching Deion now, she understood the truth. His love for his daughter wasn't a weakness. It was the anchor keeping him steady while the corporate world spun out of control around him. "Deion," she said softly, the wind pulling at her hair, "I want to thank you. For the Tangier route?" "No," she said, meeting his eyes. "For saying no to me. For refusing to let me buy you." The old power dynamic, CEO and employee, had dissolved in the cold autumn air. They were simply 2 people on a bench learning how to navigate the wreckage of their pasts together. "You're welcome." "Cloretta," he said quietly. He didn't ask her out. She didn't offer him another promotion. What mattered was the shift underneath it. She leaned back against the wooden slats, watching the leaves fall, and for the first time in her adult life, she wasn't thinking about Monday morning. She was just sitting in a park, learning how to breathe. Real wealth was never the number on Deion Morgan's paycheck, and it was never the number on Cloretta Quail's balance sheet either. It was a front row seat at a school play, a juice box under a desk, a bench in a park on a Saturday when the markets were closed. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can say to someone who has everything is simply no, because it forces them to ask what they actually have. Thank you for watching this story about boundaries, power, and finding what truly matters. If it resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more grounded, human stories like this one. Drop a comment below. Would you have turned down the CEO's offer the first time? And share this video with someone who needs the reminder that real wealth isn't always in the bank.